Welcome you to this in our ongoing series of webinars. Today we have Tim Manners, who many of you know as the publisher of the Hub magazine, Reveries, and Cool News. Also a recently published author with his marketing book, Relevance. Today he's going to talk to us about the interesting concept of can retail be media? Now before I hand this over to Tim, I just want to do a little housekeeping here. You all may have noticed that you are all on audio mute. That's how you come into this system's webinars. If you have questions, there is a question, an opportunity for you guys to text questions in. Please use the question or the chat feature, and we'll be answering questions that way. All right? So without much further ado, I will hand this over to Tim. Tim, welcome.
Thank you, Rob. It's a pleasure to be here, an honor to be here to talk about a couple of my favorite subjects, which of course are retail and media, and most of all the question of whether retail can be media. Can retail be media? I wanted to start though by telling you a little story, if I may. About a year ago, I turned 50. Thank you very much. I guess that would make me 51 now, but I try not to dwell on that too much. But when I turned 50, I decided to do something that I promised myself I would do for a long time, and that was to learn to play the guitar. Now, I found myself this great guitar teacher, a guy named David Webster. You can check him out online at davidwebstermusic.com. And we started out with sort of at the beginning, or at least the beginning as I define it, with Buddy Holly and Chuck Berry. And we worked up through the Beatles and the Stones, and then to Jimi Hendrix, my man Jimmy. And what I learned along the way, along this journey, was that the differences between Chuck Berry and Jimi Hendrix weren't as great as I would have thought they were. What that reminded me was that very often in innovation, small changes can make huge differences, and that new ideas, in many cases, are just several old ideas occurring all at once. And we tend to think of innovation as being this big, scary, mysterious thing, but in fact, very often it occurs around the margins. So when we think of retail as media, it's not necessarily about blowing up the store and starting all over again. It's more about taking what has been and bending it, sometimes just a little bit. So sometimes you just got to bend it like Hendrix. Before we really get going here, I also thought it would help if you knew a little bit about me, just so that you know where I'm coming from on this whole subject of retail as media. Other than a summer working in receiving at a Sears Roebuck store in Norwalk, Connecticut, I've never worked a day in my life at retail. Other than running a PR agency for about 25 years, I've never worked a day in my life in marketing either. I suppose we could talk about whether PR qualifies as marketing. Not to disparage it, but I do have a certain passion for the marketing business. I believe that it can be a thing of beauty. I really do. And I'm a true believer in the power of retail as a platform to build brands and drive growth. My perspective comes from three areas primarily. First, the many interviews that I've done with top marketers over the past 10 years, many of which have been published in my magazine, The Hub. Second, my daily search for the kind of insights and innovation that drive growth that I've published each weekday morning, called Cool News of the Day, and send that out both by email and also online at reveries.com. And third, I've had the privilege of working with some of the smartest people from all corners of the marketing and retailing businesses, and I've learned a thing or two from them as well. Last September, as Rob mentioned, I published my first book, which is called Relevance, Making Stuff That Matters. It was published by Portfolio, which is the business imprint of Penguin Books USA. And in it, I aggregated and remixed much of what I've picked up along the way and cast it within the context of relevance. The premise of the book is that most of what happens in marketing isn't relevant, but it doesn't have to be that way. It's not relevant for a number of reasons, but a primary reason is that most of what happens in marketing is the communication of a message, an advertising or a promotional message, when it really should be more about the creation of an experience. It seems to me that we've got our priorities reversed, or at least out of balance. There should be at least as much effort put into creating great experiences for consumers as there is on creating great advertising and promotions. I happen to think that retail presents one of the best opportunities to create the kinds of experiences that can really drive growth for brands. In fact, the potential of retail to create relevance is a thread that runs through the book. For the purposes of today's discussion, I'd like to focus on some of what constitutes relevance for brands today, and also some ways in which we gain an edge by thinking differently about the opportunity at retail. I'm probably going to raise more questions than answers, but I also hope that maybe I can offer some insight and a little inspiration along the way too. You know, I actually finished writing Relevance back in December of 2007, and obviously much has changed in the world since then. But in many ways, it seems like the issues that I raised back then are even more relevant now. When I sat down to write the book, the very first line I wrote was this: an epidemic of irrelevance has brought once powerful brands to their knees. And to be honest, at the time, I was a little worried that this was an overstatement, but I think it's safe to say that it's really not anymore. At the risk of oversimplifying, I think there's some very obvious dynamics at work that I saw as a pattern while writing Relevance. First, relevant brands never forget what made them relevant in the first place. And second, relevant brands also take a long-range strategic view. You know, think about it. At the time I was writing this book, Starbucks was riding high, but not anymore. Starbucks, I think, in many ways forgot its roots as a coffee house, and it overbuilt. It put stores where people didn't want or need them. They actually created a layer of irrelevance. Who would have thunk a year ago that some people would be calling Starbucks a marketing goat? Meanwhile, McDonald's, a year ago, 2 years ago, was not exactly perceived as a marketing hero, but I would submit that that has changed too. I do think that McDonald's did forget its point of relevance for a while, probably for a good long while, but then it remembered it, and it's still a journey for them. But you may have read about McDonald's 6-year plan, which they call the Plan to Win, which is very much about back to basics and a reaffirmation of Ray Kroc's original motto of quality, service, cleanliness, and value. Given their long-range view and their return to the principles that made them relevant to begin with, and how well they're doing as a result, I would argue that McDonald's is now a marketing hero. And speaking of marketing heroes, Paul Newman, marketing hero of mine. And this is such a great photo. I love showing this photo, particularly because, as I like to point out, there's some really interesting POP going on in the background there. I never had the honor or the privilege of interviewing Paul himself, but I did have the chance to talk at length with a guy named Tom Indo, who's been running Newman's Own for at least the last 10 years. And some of you may even remember Tom in his previous life at Del Monte. I spoke with Tom at Newman's Own headquarters in Westport, and when I was there, he gave me the tour of the place, which included Paul's office, which is quite an interesting place. But what I noticed when I was in Paul's office, he was not there at the time, was this quote. It was hanging on the wall. You can get straight A's in marketing and still flunk ordinary life. When we think about retail as media, or anything at all having to do with retail media, marketing, or shopper marketing, I believe these are words to live by because they speak to the disconnect that often happens between what goes on in marketing and what goes on in real life. And by the way, the context of this comment was that Paul Newman said it to Lee Iacocca around the time that Ford was having a problem with the Ford Pinto. You may recall a certain problem with an exploding gas tank, which is maybe a point of relevance that most of us would rather avoid. So what's the point? My overall point is that many brands are doing poorly now. Many of the brands that are doing poorly now aren't victims of the recession. In some ways, they helped create the recession. Lehman Brothers comes to mind as a brand that lost its way and pulled a good chunk of the economy down with it. The recession really just laid bare a lot of mistakes that were made a long time ago based on decisions that were too short-term, too tactical, too disconnected from reality. But the good news is that if irrelevance got these brands into this mess, then I believe relevance can help get them out of it. The hard part is to stay rooted in what made you relevant in the first place while projecting your relevance into the future. The good news is that retail provides an amazing opportunity to reassert relevance or create relevance where it didn't exist before. But capitalizing on that opportunity means reassessing what we mean when we talk about retail as media. Here's my bias. I don't think retail media is just another word for displays or merchandising or promotions. It may include those things, but I think it's much bigger than that. I think retail as media is about the shopping experience in total and how well it serves the shopper's needs. So that would include things like store design, navigation, and most of all, customer service. The ultimate test of a successful retail media strategy is whether it makes the shopper happy, whether it leaves the shopper feeling good about the experience and enthusiastic about coming back. Because ultimately, it's all about building loyalty. And by the way, I just want to point out that this issue of the hub, if you notice the date, was the summer of 2001. So even back then, we were asking the question, which I believe remains largely unanswered. Well, maybe not can retail be media, but how is the question. So what I'd like to do is talk about a handful of retailers that I think capture the concept of retail as media and message within this larger context. Stu Leonard. Stu Leonard's, as you probably know, is a legendary grocery store. I think they've got a total of 4 stores across Connecticut and New York. They're known for a lot of things, just an incredible number of innovations. But Stu Leonard's did something a few years ago that I believe rarely happens at retail. Stu ripped out a perfectly good fish department and replaced it with one that's truly spectacular. He did this at tremendous cost and disruption. They actually were selling fish out of buckets of ice for 6 months. But Stu did this because he understood that ultimately retail as media is all about the experience. Now, he could have kept the old fish counter and run an ad campaign or promotions behind it, but as we all know, the effect of that would have been short-lived. Instead, he invested in a long-term vision of delighting his shoppers, knowing that people would drive a great distance for a spectacular seafood department, and they would spend a lot of money on a lot of other things once they were there. It's hard to imagine that Stu Leonard's didn't achieve a very positive ROI on this initiative. They're a privately held company, so we don't really know. But certainly it had to have been good for the seafood department and across the store in general. So Stu Leonard's, the medium is the store, and the message is, wow. Keel's Apothecary. You're probably familiar with Keel's. They've got stores worldwide, I think at least 200 stores, maybe more than that. But they still have their original store, which this is pretty incredible, in New York City. It's in the same location since its founding in 1851. It's at 109 3rd Avenue, if you have a chance to check it out. One of the things that Keel's does and does well is they create a sense of theater. They've got old druggist relics like anatomical charts, bottles of potassium chlorate and Epsom salt tins, things like that. The clerks, as you can see in this picture, dress in white lab coats. The culture, though, is low pressure. They'll tell you about various products, but instead of pressuring you to buy them, they'll throw some samples into a bag, let you take them home, try them. If you like them, then you can come back and buy them. So the idea here is not only to provide exceptional service, but to create an atmosphere that makes shoppers feel relaxed. So at Keel's Apothecary, the medium is the store, and the message is, maybe for lack of a better word, service. Simple stuff. Economy Candy. This is one of my absolute favorite examples. It's another New York City retail landmark on New York's Lower East Side. It's I happened to stumble in there one day last summer, unplanned. It's not a huge store, Economy Candy, but it creates this really big impression. It's actually a rather narrow store. It's long. The ceiling's high. It has almost an airplane hangar quality to it. It feels kind of like a warehouse and a small shop all in one shot. But what makes economy candy memorable and relevant is its religious focus on just one thing, and that thing, of course, is candy. From the highest-end chocolate bars to the cheapest gumballs, it's hard to imagine that economy candy omits any kind of candy known to humankind, including some brands that you would have thought had been extinct for decades. In fact, some of them may have been. I didn't check expiration dates while I was there. They take a rather old-fashioned view of merchandising. It's very much a pilot high and watch it fly kind of concept going on there. True to its name, economy candy prides itself on low prices, but it's this singular focus on just one thing and taking it to this insanely wonderful extreme that makes economy candy so special. I actually think Starbucks would do well to look at economy candy as it considers how to get back to what used to make it relevant. I'd also like to point out the clutter. It's kind of hard to miss this part. You know, in marketing, we tend to disparage clutter. It's something that we want to cut through or eliminate. But at economy candy, clutter actually creates a certain warmth, a kind of comfort. So I think maybe it's time to reconsider clutter while we ponder what we mean by retail as media. Two other things worth noting about economy candy. One is that it is so obviously family-run, and it's been that way, as I understand it, since 1937. Young guy at the cash register calls out to his dad. A customer asks him, "Where's your mom today?" It gives off this great, friendly, heartfelt vibe. The other thing about economy candy is the smell, which can be described in just one word. I'll give you just one guess. The word is sugar. So economy candy, the medium is the store, and the message is intoxicating. Bottle Rocket. Bottle Rocket is a wine shop in New York City, and I guess I'm kind of stuck on New York City today, but there are just so many great retail examples there. Bottle Rocket features 365 different kinds of wine, one for every day of the year. And some of this is merchandised in a rather traditional way, kind of lined up on one side of the store alphabetically by country from Argentina to the U.S. But then down the middle of the store, the same wines are organized around kiosks by theme, as you can see here on this little graphic. So there's wine to have with seafood, for instance, which is then broken down into heavier and lighter fish dishes. There's a kiosk, as you can see, called Gifts, and they've got subheadings under that, one of which I understand is Third Date, which sounds interesting. There was a story about Bottle Rocket in the Wall Street Journal, which is actually how I heard about it, in which the store's founder, Tom Janice, commented, and this is a direct quote, he said, "Wine is such a confusing but very rewarding subject, so I thought, gee, there must be a way that this complex world can be presented to folks in such a way that they can be intelligent and learn and grow confident." I think that's a really important point, that Bottle Rocket is a store that works at making its customers feel smart. So at Bottle Rocket, the medium's the store, and the message is knowledge. Pure Dark. Maybe you've heard about this one. We had a great article about it in the Hub a couple of issues back. And yet again, a store in New York City. This one's in the Soho area. And another store that involves candy. Pure Dark is a temporary store, a pop-up shop, that I believe is actually being sponsored by a major candy maker that's using it as kind of a laboratory. I believe it's M&M Mars. I don't know that for certain. It is kind of hard to go wrong with chocolate, but the thing that distinguishes Pure Dark is that it lets its customers customize its chocolates with various kinds of toppings. You can go in there and you can pick out your chocolate, and then you can sprinkle different toppings like cinnamon or chipotle or whatever you might like on your chocolate to make it as you like it. And from the looks of this picture, there's some wine involved too, and that, of course, can't be bad. One other thing worth noting about Pure Dark is that the store is doing extremely well, even in these tough economic times. Like I said, maybe it's hard to go wrong with chocolate, but it's not just another chocolate store, because it actively involves its shoppers in the product it sells. So at Pure Dark, the medium is the store, and the message is engagement. Saturn. I found this picture online while I was searching for images to use to talk about Saturn. the car company. This picture is from a promotional campaign that Saturn ran, which asked consumers to take pictures of themselves kissing their cars. They called the campaign Kiss My Astra, which of course is because Astra is one of their models. As you may know, we featured an interview with Jill Lajak, the general manager of Saturn, in the hub right after GM announced that it would no longer support the brand. And it may seem like an unlikely choice, unlikely timing for a feature interview, but we felt actually that it was perfect timing because Saturn really has stood almost alone among car companies in using retail as media. In fact, it's interesting that Saturn doesn't refer to its dealerships as dealerships. They refer to their dealerships as retailers. I think it's more than semantics, too. I think it suggests a certain outlook that's a bit different. Saturn is not a luxury brand by any means, but I would submit that the way it treats its customers at retail, that is with respect and again with intelligence, qualifies as a luxury experience, because luxury really isn't about price. It's about rarity. It's about scarcity. And being treated with respect and intelligence at a car dealership, as I think most of us would agree, is indeed a rare and scarce experience. By the way, Jill Lajak says that it isn't over for Saturn, that the plan is to reinvent the Saturn as a distribution company and source cars from all over the world. And that should be very interesting to watch. So with Saturn, the medium is the store, and the message is love. All you need is love. At this point, I'd like to raise a few questions. I said I was going to raise more questions than answers. A few questions to consider as we contemplate the concept of retail as media. The first is, are consumers and shoppers really all that different? There's a difference in frame of mind, for sure. Consumers are more passive, with an emphasis on the attitudinal, while shoppers are more active, with an emphasis on the behavioral. That's a big difference. But the question in my mind is whether that line is blurring. And I think it might be, and mainly because of mobile devices, which potentially turn consumers into shoppers 24/7. You can be anywhere at this point and be a shopper. Doesn't matter. Is shopper marketing a contradiction in terms? I think that it is, and here's why. Marketing is a term out of the consumer's world, which again is about a more passive, attitudinal frame of mind. If shoppers are more active and behavioral, then maybe we should adopt terminology that reflects that. At retail, it's less about the communication of an advertising or promotional message in the usual sense, and more about making sure that the shopper is having the best possible shopping experience. In many cases, perhaps in most cases, this may not have anything to do with marketing in the traditional sense. It may have more to do with customer service. Is the twilight struggle between sales and marketing really over? Well, not bloody likely. Although a lot of marketing and salespeople that I've talked to suggest that progress is being made. The issue actually seems to have flared up again with the advent of shopper marketing and the question over whether shopper marketing should report to sales or to marketing. But is this a false choice? Clearly, both sales and marketing are critical to the success of shopper marketing. Marketing brings shopper insight and a long-term vision and strategy. Sales brings retailer understanding and a more tactical executional element. Sales snaps marketing back to reality and introduces the all-important possibility of measurement, too. So it's not an either-or question. It needs to be a truly collaborative effort. Don't we need to figure out how to measure that, how to quantify the effectiveness of the experience at retail? I personally have no idea where to start with that, but I do think it deserves more attention from those who might. I'd like to finish up with another story. I wrote Relevance for many reasons, but I wrote it mostly as a tribute to my father, who wrote 27 books in his lifetime. He died about 2 years ago, actually. He was almost 95. He was 94 years old when he died. And when he passed away, I thought that as a tribute to him, I ought to try to write at least one book. The day after he died, my friend Philip, who I've known since high school, freshman algebra, showed up on my doorstep, and he had a carton of strawberries in each hand. And he looked at me as if I should know what the significance of this was. And when I didn't, he said, "You don't remember. Your father once said, as long as I have strawberries, I feel prosperous." And Philip was right. I actually had no memory at all of my father having said that, but I don't doubt for a moment that he did, because it sounded just like him, and it certainly reflected his younger days during the Great Depression, an experience that never left him and is more relevant today than it has been at any other time since I can remember. Probably most of us can remember. And since I never talked to him, never had the chance to talk to him about what he meant by it, I suspect that, knowing him, he was probably talking about the real value of money. But I think his words also speak to the value of the experience and the possibility that small things can make a big difference in our lives. If strawberries equal prosperity, then I see great opportunities ahead, not only in marketing or retail, but in life itself. I see riches beyond our wildest imagination. So that's something to think about as we consider the potential of retail as media and how we ought to measure the ROI on a better shopping experience. Thank you very much. I'd be happy to entertain any questions if there are any.
All right, everyone. I see many of you, this is Rob Fields again, I see many of you are listening via your computer screen. So I'm not sure if you have headsets on or not. I'm going to try and unmute some of the people that have asked questions. Here is a question from Oscar. Let me see, Oscar, are you on a phone line or? No, Oscar, you're listening on your computer, so I think you're going to have to go ahead and type that question in. Tim, as I suspected, Oscar is wondering, and I'm sure other people are, will a copy of the deck be available?
Oh, certainly, yes.
Sir.
Absolutely.
Great, and we'll get that and send that out before the end of the day to everyone who has attended.
And I listed my email address there if anyone cares to email me with questions or follow-up. Happy to make new friends.
Great. Additional questions, anyone? Well, I've seen no additional questions.
Okay.
So I think we're going to be getting out early. Again, you can look for an email from us this afternoon with Tim's deck. Thank you all. We also have a short survey that we'd appreciate you taking. It's going to be 6 questions, but we like to get feedback on these webinars so that we can know what topics need to be addressed. Speaking of new topics, please join us next Thursday, the 16th, when we do a webinar on gift cards. We'll take both a legal and a strategic marketing perspective. Melissa Steinman is a partner at Venable, a law firm down in D.C., has deep experience in gift cards on the legal side. And then Talbot Roche is a senior VP at Blackhawk Network, which is a Safeway subsidiary, is going to be talking about gift cards from a marketing standpoint and how to build loyalty. So please register for that if you haven't done so already. Sarah Plotnick. Wait, Sarah Plotnick has a question, and
Okay.
let's see if Sarah's on her computer. Yeah, unfortunately, I can't open. I can't open your line, Sarah. So you should go ahead and here we go. Sarah wants to know, how do we affect the retail experience when we don't have access to the dealers?
Honestly, I'm not sure I understand the question. Who are the dealers in the equation? Is there a category in particular she's asking about?
Yeah, she says she works for Victory Motorcycles. So yeah, so she's talking about dealers in a kind of a car or motorcycle.
Well, that is a real challenge, and that is what dogs, the auto industry certainly. Saturn managed to work its way around that because of the way that it grew up, at least initially, outside the infrastructure of General Motors. But you look at a franchise like BMW, for example. They have almost no control over their dealerships because those dealerships largely grew up very independently totally independently of the mothership. I'm not sure I'm qualified really to answer that question directly, and I hate to default to the obvious example, but Apple might have been asking itself that question at one time, and I know that its dissatisfaction with the way its brand was being presented through its channels, through its dealers, was a major reason why it chose to start its own stores. And if you remember, when Apple started out with its stores initially, there was a lot of question and even criticism about Apple that it was going to effectively go into competition with its dealers, and how could they do that? I think it's fair to say that they did do that. It was kind of torpedoes be damned, and maybe they, or damn the torpedoes rather, maybe it was torpedoes be damned as well, I don't know. And it worked out for them. And the point I was making earlier about Jimi Hendrix, I would make it about Apple. I think everybody looks at Apple like they can't do what Apple does because they're Apple and they're special, but they're not at all. Yes, Steve Jobs is a great man, and I have great admiration for the company. But you look at an innovation at Apple that is noteworthy as the iPod, and what is that really except a transistor radio that's been updated to the 21st century? In many ways, it's an innovation around the margins, not that different from the kind of innovation that Jimi Hendrix pulled out of Chuck Berry. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I tried. Thanks.
And one more question, Tim?
Yes.
Yes, Jennifer Bolt has asked, what role will in-store media networks play in this mix?
They, I think, have a big job ahead of them. I think there's huge opportunity there, but I think to date, most of what has transpired in that category has fallen under under sort of the classification of trying to shoehorn traditional media into what I believe is a very non-traditional environment, the retail store. But there are technologies emerging, particularly interactive technologies that relate to the cell phone. I mentioned the potential of mobile devices earlier to really transform what it means to be a consumer versus what it means to be a shopper. At some point, people will be using their phones really to navigate their way through the store. In many cases, interacting with these networks. So there definitely is a very significant opportunity there. But I think it really is going to require a different view of the potential of these digital networks as not just purveyors of repurposers of traditional advertising, but really as an opportunity to provide new levels. The interesting piece in the New York Times about a week ago about some innovations in kiosks that Intel is undertaking that really take that kind of interactive technology to a new level. Allows the shopper, for example, in an apparel store setting to see what they look like in the store with those clothes on without actually even having to try on the clothes. So huge potential there, but a long way to go.
Any more questions, anyone? Don't see anyone else raising their digital hands here, so I think that's going to be it. I want to thank Tim again for taking this time to join us, and I want to thank you all for joining us, and I hope this was valuable, and I hope you'll also continue to join us for future PMA webinars. So Tim, thank you, and we'll see you all soon.
Thanks, Rob.